When did American history begin? Hello, my name is Wesley Cragen and I am a lover of history. I particularly enjoy reading about the history of my country, the United States of America. I love reading about the entirety of American history from its beginning to its present. But wait, when is the beginning of American history exactly? Surely I'm not the only person who has thought about that question. Which date in history do you think marked the beginning of the United States of America? After pondering this for a while, I have come to a solid conclusion and know for certain when I think the history of my country began. However, I ask you to be patient with me as I wait until later in the video to reveal my opinion. First, I would like to go over some of the different dates that could be viewed as the first date in American history. The first option, Native Americans. Some people may argue that the history of the USA begins with Native Americans and their various cultures and civilizations that existed before European settlers arrived on their shores. After all, they would argue the Native Americans were here first, thus making them the first Americans. This must mean that the time when they first crossed the Bering Strait from Asia to the Americas was the beginning of American history. While this is a good argument, and I don't deny that the Native American people were, in a way, the first Americans, I still cannot recognize this as the beginning of American history. The reason I say this is because I view the history of Native Americans as fundamentally separate from the history of the United States. In my view, Native American history predates the United States of America, is far more ancient than U.S. history, and only in recent centuries has it become a part of U.S. history. Since Native American people lived in this land long before it became the sovereign state that we know today, and because they technically did not play a part in the country's founding, the beginning of their history must be viewed as separate from the beginning of U.S. American history. The second option, the discovery of Christopher Columbus. A second date that many people seem to think marked the beginning of American history is 1492, the year of the so-called discovery of America by Italian sailor and explorer Christopher Columbus. Real quickly, I know Columbus didn't discover America, but let's put that aside for now. I do not view this as being the beginning of American history either, for one simple reason. Christopher Columbus never once landed in the modern-day United States. I feel that people often misunderstand the statement that Columbus discovered America. People seem to think that that statement is referring to the United States of America, when it is actually referring to all of the Americas. North, South, Central, and Caribbean America were all known collectively as America. When Columbus landed, it was in the Caribbean, not in the part of North America where the United States is now. The third option, Spanish Florida. Since we've established that Columbus's discovery was not on modern-day U.S. soil, you are probably wondering who exactly was the first European to set foot in what is now the USA. The answer to that question is a man named Pedro Menendez de Aviles, who founded the Spanish colony of St. Augustine in what is now the state of Florida in the year 1565. This was the first permanent American colony, predating even Jamestown by 42 years. However, you may be surprised to know that even this I don't consider to be when American history began. The fact is that although the Spanish were the first to colonize land in the modern-day U.S., the colonies that they founded here never became independent from Spain, neither individually nor as a united confederation. Yes, I know Mexico and the colonies of Latin America all gained independence from Spain, but I am not talking about those colonies. I am talking about the ones in the modern-day U.S., such as Florida and Texas. In case this section seems a little bit muddled, I will reiterate my underlying point. I do not believe that the founding of St. Augustine or any other Spanish colony marks the beginning of U.S. history, simply because the country we have today did not grow out of Spain's colonies. The fourth option, American independence. For many people, the most logical place to claim that American history began was at the time of its independence, which it gained from Great Britain between 1776 and 1783. After all, a country isn't really a country in our eyes until it is sovereign over its own affairs. and I don't deny that the end of the Revolutionary War marked the beginning of America as a sovereign state. But the purpose of this video is not to determine when American statehood began, but to determine when American history began. The independent United States that entered the world in the 1700s was merely a fully matured blossom that grew out of a seed planted in the 1600s. That seed, I feel, was one of the English colonies. But which one? Of all the many colonies that England planted here, there are only two real candidates in my mind for the one that marked the beginning of our country's history, which I will list now. The fifth option, Plymouth, Massachusetts. The founding of Plymouth, Massachusetts in 1620 by the religious group known as the Pilgrims is often considered a beginning. It was the beginning of a new life for people who were looking for freedom from religious persecution. It was the beginning of what would eventually become the U.S. state of Massachusetts, and it was the beginning of the idea that America is a place of refuge and freedom from tyranny. All of those are beautiful things, and it would be idyllic if this was where American history truly began. Unfortunately, however, it is not, simply because there is one more English colony on the list that predates it, and that colony provides the answer to our overall question. The sixth option, Jamestown, Virginia. James Fort, or Jamestown, Virginia, as it was later renamed, is, in my opinion, where American history began. This is because it was the first permanent English colony in America, predating even Plymouth. The only other English colony that could be said to have come before Jamestown is the lost colony of Roanoke in modern-day North Carolina, but that colony has not been considered because it ceased existing after its settlers disappeared and were never found. Jamestown, however, was, as I said before, permanent. It was the first English colony to endure. Sadly, the reasons behind its founding were not as noble as those behind the founding of Plymouth, with the men who initially settled it being more interested in gold and profits than in freedom. Their adventures do, nonetheless, make an interesting read. The colony's founding in 1607, despite having questionable motives behind it, is fascinating to learn about and has a certain historical beauty to it. I should reiterate that the reason I chose Jamestown as the place where American history began, as opposed to the much older Spanish colony of St. Augustine, Florida, is because I feel that the United States that we know today was born out of the English colonies and not the Spanish ones. It was British settlers who formed the government of this land when they gained independence from their mother country. It was British culture that influenced America's own culture the most, and English was and is still the dominant language of this land. Let me summarize. The United States that we know today came out of the English colonies, so it can be safely said that the English colonies, with Jamestown being the first, are where American history began. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Please leave a like and subscribe to this channel if you did. My name is Wesley Cragen, and I am an American son of liberty.